The silent stranger. The sun beat down on Harmony Gulch like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, baking the dust devils that danced down Main Street. The false front buildings, once painted in cheerful hues, were now faded and cracked, mirroring the weary faces of the townsfolk. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the porch sitters as a lone rider appeared on the horizon, a silhouette against the shimmering heat. He rode a powerful, muscular horse, the color of dried river clay. The man himself was lean, almost gaunt, his face hidden beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. A rifle scabbard was fastened to his saddle, and a coiled rope hung ready for use. As he drew closer, the townsfolk noticed the fine quality of his saddle leather, contrasting with the patched and faded denim of his clothes. He reined in before the general store, the only building on Main Street still boasting a lick of paint. The silence that followed his arrival was heavier than the midday heat. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Martha Higgins, perched on her usual spot on the store's porch, fanned herself with a tattered church pamphlet and squinted. "Well, now," she drawled, loud enough for half the town to hear, "look what the cat dragged in. Another drifter looking for a handout, no doubt." The rider dismounted with a fluid grace that belied his rough appearance. He didn't acknowledge Martha's comment, didn't even glance in her direction. Instead, he looped his reins around the hitching post and turned towards the water trough, his movements economical and deliberate. He checked the trough's level, then nodded once, satisfied, before turning his attention to his horse. "Morning," Sheriff Brody offered, his voice a low rumble. He leaned against the doorframe of the general store, his hand resting casually on the butt of his revolver. The rider nodded again, his eyes, the color of dark coffee, briefly met the sheriff's. No words passed his lips. Martha Higgins sputtered. "Didn't your mama teach you to speak, mister? Or are you one of them mutes?" He ignored her, pulling a small burlap sack from his saddlebag. Inside were oats. He offered them to his horse, who gratefully crunched them. The horse nuzzled the man's hand. Dusty stroked the animal's velvety nose. A young boy, no older than 7, ventured closer, drawn by the magnificent horse. "He's real strong, mister," the boy whispered, his eyes wide with admiration. The rider's lips quirked slightly, a hint of a smile. He reached into his saddlebag again and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden horse. He held it out to the boy. The boy gasped and reached for it, his fingers tracing the smooth curves of the wood. "Thank you, mister," he exclaimed, clutching the toy tightly. Martha Higgins sniffed. "Bribing children now, are we? Probably stolen goods." The rider turned, his gaze finally settling on Martha. There was no anger in his eyes, just a quiet observation. He reached for his rope, shaking it out in a practiced motion. With a flick of his wrist, the loop sailed through the air and settled perfectly around a weathered post 20 feet away. He tugged the rope taut, then released it with another flick, the loop disappearing back into its coil. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. His skill was undeniable. "Show off," Martha muttered, though even she seemed impressed. The rider recoiled his rope. The boy, still clutching his wooden horse, piped up. "My name's Billy, mister. What's yours?" The rider paused, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of leather. He offered it to Billy. Scrawled on the leather in faded ink was a single word, Dusty. "Dusty," Billy repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "That's a good name." Dusty nodded once, then turned and walked towards the general store. He pushed open the door, the bell above jingling merrily in the otherwise silent town. Inside, the store was dim and smelled of dust, coffee beans, and old leather. The storekeeper, a wizened man with a permanent squint, looked up from behind the counter. Dusty pointed to a bag of flour, a slab of bacon, and a box of cartridges. He then placed a small pouch of gold nuggets on the counter. The storekeeper's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the gold. He weighed the nuggets carefully, then gathered the items Dusty had requested. "Anything else, Mr. Dusty?" he asked, curiosity lacing his voice. Dusty shook his head. He collected his purchases, his movements efficient and silent. As he turned to leave, his gaze drifted towards the back of the store, towards a window overlooking a small field. In that field, bathed in the harsh afternoon sun, a young woman was tending a patch of sunflowers. Her movements were careful and deliberate as she watered each plant, her face tilted towards the sun. Even from a distance, Dusty could see the delicate curve of her cheek, the gentle slope of her shoulders. She was blind. He lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on the woman. Then he turned and walked out of the store, back into the blinding light of Harmony Gulch. He loaded his supplies onto his horse, tightened the cinch, and swung back into the saddle. Martha Higgins watched him go, her eyes narrowed. "Strange one," she muttered to Sheriff Brody, who had moved closer. Too quiet. Too good with that rope. And that gold, where'd he get that? Sheriff Brody shrugged. He paid for his goods, Martha. That's all that matters. Besides, he added, his gaze following Dusty as he rode out of town, he seems like a decent sort. Dusty didn't look back. He rode slowly, deliberately, his eyes fixed on the horizon. But in his mind, he saw the young woman in the sunflower field, her face turned towards the sun. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he would be staying in Harmony Gulch. Sunflower girl. The sun beat down on the sea of sunflowers, their heavy heads bowed slightly as if in prayer. Dusty leaned against the rough-hewn fence, watching Lily move among them. She wasn't just tending them, she was talking to them, her voice a low, gentle hum that carried on the slight breeze. He watched as she carefully straightened a leaning stalk, her fingers tracing the curve of a velvet petal. He'd seen her do this every day since arriving. He noticed a grasshopper clinging to a leaf, nearly invisible against the green. Lily didn't see it, of course. But as she moved closer, she paused, her head tilted as if listening. Then, with a grace that belied her blindness, she reached out and gently nudged the insect onto another plant. Dusty pushed himself away from the fence and walked towards the farmhouse, a weathered structure that looked as tired as Caleb Meadowsweet himself. Caleb was wrestling with a broken wagon wheel, his face red with exertion. Dusty approached and pointed at the wheel, then mimed lifting and straightening it. Caleb straightened, wiping his brow with a grimy hand. He studied Dusty for a long moment, suspicion warring with a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Don't have much to pay," Caleb finally rasped, his voice rough from years of hard labor and worry. Dusty shook his head and pointed to the sunflowers, then back at himself. He mimed watering and weeding, a silent offer of help. Caleb's shoulders slumped with relief. All right, can't say no to a helping hand." Dusty nodded and immediately set to work, his movements efficient and strong. He found a sturdy piece of timber and used it as a lever, easing the wagon wheel back into place. Caleb watched, his initial suspicion slowly giving way to grudging respect. Lily, hearing the sounds of hammering and grunting, made her way towards them, guided by the familiar scent of wood and earth. "Papa? What's going on?" "Just got some help here, Lilybug," Caleb said, his voice a shade lighter than it had been moments before. "Mr. He trailed off, realizing he didn't even know Dusty's name. Dusty pointed to himself, then mimed writing in the dirt. He crouched down and with a calloused finger scratched the word Dusty. Lily knelt beside him, her fingers lightly tracing the letters in the soil. "Dusty," she repeated, the name sounding like a whispered prayer on her lips. "Thank you for helping us." He smiled, a rare and fleeting expression that transformed his weathered face. He pulled a small notepad and pencil from his pocket and wrote, "Sunflowers beautiful." He tore off the page and offered it to her. Lily took the note, her fingers lingering on his for a brief moment. A blush rose on her cheeks. "They need a lot of care," she replied, her voice soft. "Especially with the drought." Dusty nodded, understanding in his eyes. He wrote another note, "I water." Lily smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, even though they couldn't see. "That would be wonderful, Dusty." As the days turned into weeks, Dusty became an indispensable part of the Meadowsweet farm. He repaired fences, cleared weeds, and hauled water from the dwindling creek. He and Lily developed a unique way of communicating, a combination of gestures, simple written notes, and a shared understanding that transcended words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lily sat on the porch swing, shelling peas. Dusty sat beside her, sharpening a scythe. She paused, her fingers still. "Dusty," she began hesitantly, I worry I'm not much help around here. Being blind." Dusty stopped sharpening the scythe. He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. He wrote on his notepad, "You strong. You kind. You help." He placed the note in her hand and closed her fingers around it. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She clutched the note tightly, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something she couldn't quite name. "Papa says I should learn to be a seamstress," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Says it's a respectable trade for a blind woman." Dusty frowned. He took the notepad again and wrote, "You choose." Lily looked down at her hands, calloused and stained with dirt. She might be blind, but she was strong. She was capable. And maybe, just maybe, she could choose her own path regardless of what others thought she should do. She looked up, her blind eyes searching for his. "Thank you, Dusty," she said, her voice filled with newfound determination. "Thank you for seeing me." Dust and drought. The sun blazed upon meadowsweet, an incandescent hammer pounding the life from the soil. Where once rich loam cradled seeds, brittle clods fractured, and miniature whirlwinds danced like taunting dervishes across the parched expanse. The creek, once a cheerful babbler, now whispered a dry lament, exposing bleached stones and stranding tiny creatures in evaporating pools. Caleb, a stooped figure on the porch, watched the dust devils gyrate. He raked a weathered hand back through his thinning hair, each day adding new canyons to the map of worry etched on his face. Weeks had passed without rain, the wellspring dwindled, and the specter of ruin loomed. His inheritance from his wife, the promise of a future for Lily, all threatened to vanish. From the south field came the percussive rhythm of metal striking earth. Dusty's tireless labor. Caleb marveled at the man, this taciturn enigma who'd materialized from nowhere. Regardless of his origin, his grit, his unwavering toil, were undeniable. Dusty meticulously sculpted earthen rings around the tomato plants, miniature fortresses guarding against evaporation. A makeshift aqueduct of salvaged pipes and pails rerouted the creek's meager flow, each precious drop measured and delivered. It was slow, backbreaking work, the only bulwark against utter loss. Lily, perched on the porch swing, traced the grain of the aged wood. The inferno radiating from the ground pressed against her skin, the air thick with the scent of scorching earth and palpable anxiety. Even sightless, she perceived the farm's agony. "Papa's troubled," she murmured, her voice as frail as the dried stalks in the fields. Dusty paused, glancing towards the porch. Though deaf to her words, he grasped their meaning. Her slumped form, the nervous clenching of her hands, spoke volumes. A slow nod, a silent acknowledgement of her pain, then he resumed his work, each movement imbued with purpose. With a weary sigh, Caleb joined Lily on the swing, the timbers groaning beneath his weight. "Dusty's a godsend. Works like 10 men. He does," Lily concurred. "He's quiet, but I feel his care." She inclined her head, listening. "Is he still with the tomatoes?" "Aye. Fighting a losing battle, I reckon." Despair choked Caleb's voice. "It's a drop in the bucket, Lily. Not nearly enough." Lily's hand found his, her touch surprisingly strong. "Don't despair, Papa. We've weathered worse. This feels different, Lilybug. This is death by inches. Watching all we hold dear wither away." He squeezed her hand, his grip of ice. The sun began its descent, painting the fields with long, gaunt shadows. Dusty ceased his labors, his shirt plastered to his back with sweat, his face masked in dust. He approached the house, bearing 2 brimming pails. He placed them gently near the porch, signing to Lily with fluid grace. "Water for the herbs." A spark ignited in Lily's eyes. "Thank you, Dusty." Turning to Caleb, she added, "He remembers the herbs, even though I can't tend them anymore." Caleb watched Dusty head towards the well, his expression a knot of confusion. The man's devotion was unsettling, bordering on selfless. Why expend this much energy? He was practically a stranger. Later, after a sparse meal of beans and stale bread, Lily lingered outside, the crickets sang a somber chorus. Dusty, silhouetted against the fading light, mended a breach in the fence, the hammer's echo reverberating through the stillness. "Dusty?" Lily called, her voice clear despite its softness. He stopped hammering, turning towards her, his gaze questioning. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You owe us nothing." He hesitated, then approached her. He settled on the ground a few feet away, leaning against a weathered post. He picked up a shard of stone and sketched in the dirt. First, a simple tree, its branches reaching skyward. Then, a protective circle encompassing it. Understanding dawned. He was safeguarding the farm, nurturing it back to health. But the reason escaped her. He erased the enclosure and drew a hand extending towards the tree. Then, another hand, hers also reaching. He joined the hands. Lily's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't merely rescuing the farm. He was rescuing them, binding them together, recognizing something worth preserving within their family. A solitary tear carved a path down her cheek. "Thank you, Dusty," she breathed. "Thank you." Silence was his only reply. He merely nodded, his eyes meeting hers in the deepening twilight. Then, he retrieved his hammer, the rhythmic clang a steady pulse against the silence, a cadence of hope against the encroaching darkness, a silent proposal. Lily sat on the porch swing, her toes nudging the weathered planks. The sinking sun splashed the fields with ochre and russet light. Dusty approached, careful not to break her reverie. In his hand he held a stone, smoothed over hours with sand and water into a pristine tablet. He settled beside her, the swing emitting a soft groan. Lily turned, a gentle smile warming her face. "Dusty?" He affirmed with a nod, then, remembering her sightlessness, added a quiet yes. He took her hand, his rough palm cradling hers. With his other, he placed the stone in her hand and, with deliberate care, etched letters onto its surface. "Lily, Willyumarryme?" He repeated it, slow and distinct, each stroke a tangible question. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She traced the carved words, a bewildered disbelief slowly replacing her smile. "Dusty," she breathed, her voice trembling slightly. She drew her hand away, clutching the stone. "Why this?" He reclaimed her hand, holding it firmly. He gestured to himself, then drew a heart in the air, finishing by pointing to her. Next, he indicated the parched earth, miming watering and new growth. The unspoken proposal resonated. He offered not just himself, but a vision. A future for the struggling farm, for her family. But was it love, or a need for the land? Caleb emerged from the barn, wiping his forehead. He noticed Dusty and Lily on the swing, her expression troubled. Fatigue weighed each step as he approached. "Everything all right here?" Caleb's voice was laced with concern. Lily extended the stone to her father. Caleb accepted it, his fingers, gnarled from years of labor, feeling out the carving. Surprise widened his eyes, followed by a narrowing as he regarded Dusty. "You serious, son?" His tone was gravelly. Dusty answered with an unwavering nod, meeting Caleb's scrutiny with quiet resolve. Caleb sighed, raking a hand through his sparse hair. "Lily's a good girl, Dusty, but she deserves more than this place can give. More than I can." Dusty shook his head. He grasped both Caleb's and Lily's hands. He mimed joining them, then swept his arm to encompass the farm. "He wants to care for us all," Lily interpreted softly, her voice a mere thread of sound. "And the farm." Caleb's face softened microscopically, though suspicion lingered in his gaze. "Caring is one thing, Dusty. Marriage, that's a different proposition entirely. Have you truly considered it? Lily needs a man who can provide. Her blindness makes for a difficult life." Dusty reached into a pocket and produced a time-worn leather pouch. Inside lay a miniature hoard of polished stones, agate, jasper, a fleck of turquoise amongst them. He offered the pouch to Caleb. Caleb examined the stones, recognizing the semi-precious gems. "Where'd these come from?" Dusty gestured vaguely westward, then pantomimed digging. He could provide. He could earn. Caleb's gaze traveled from the stones to Dusty, then back to Lily, who watched with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He observed the earnest affection in Dusty's gaze, the quiet strength in his bearing. He also saw the vulnerability in Lily's eyes, the uncertainty dimming her usual spark. "This is Lily's decision, Dusty," Caleb said, returning the pouch. "But you treat her right, you hear? You hurt her, and you'll answer to me." Dusty nodded solemnly, his focus locked on Lily. Caleb turned back to the barn, leaving them alone as dusk deepened around them. Lily turned to Dusty, her fingertips still tracing the question on the stone. I don't know what to say." Dusty gently took the stone and inscribed yes onto her palm. Lily bit her lip, her heart hammering. Could she truly build a life with this taciturn man? A man who had shown her more kindness and understanding than she had ever known? A man who saw past her darkness, into her very being? She closed her eyes, picturing Dusty's capable hands, his rare smile, the way his gaze made her feel cherished. She thought of the farm, her home, the future he promised. Opening her eyes, she met his gaze. "I need time, Dusty." He gave a single, understanding nod. He knew he was asking everything and offering little insight, but he would show her, bit by bit. Whispers of doubt. The news unfurled across Harmony Gulch, a rampant creeper vine smothering all other chatter. Its source, predictably, was Martha Higgins. Spotting Dusty on his way to town, his face a rigid mask of determination, her insatiable nosiness demanded satisfaction. From Ezra at the Mercantile, who'd overheard Caleb speaking with Doc Hemlock, she gleaned the gist. "Dusty?" And Lily met a sweet, tying the knot. Martha's voice, already sharp, pierced the air. "That wanderer? But poor Lily can't even see him." Ezra, seasoned in the art of self-preservation, merely grunted. Arguing with Martha was a futile exercise, akin to wrestling an oiled boar. But Martha needed no further prompting. She swept out of the store, her floral dress a swirling banner of disapproval. seeking receptive ears at the quilting circle held at the church hall. Needles paused mid-stitch, voices softened, as Martha, a portrait of manufactured grief, broke the tidings. "Poor Lily," she lamented, shaking her head. "A blind girl wedding a man no one knows. Scandalous." The women, initially stunned, soon recovered their voices. Suspicions, like insidious tendrils, wound their way through the group. Was Dusty after the farm? Was Caleb, in his desperation, settling for the unknown? Had Lily, innocent and sheltered, been charmed by empty promises? "He does seem a capable fellow," Sarah Jenkins ventured hesitantly, her voice barely audible. She'd observed Dusty repairing fences, his brow furrowed in concentration, a stark contrast to Martha's dour assessment. Martha dismissed her with a snort. "Hard work won't fill the larder if you don't know the land. And what kind of life awaits that girl? He'll expect a homemaker, a mother, roles she can scarcely manage now." Whispers trailed Lily's every step. She felt them, a phantom touch on her skin, a subtle alteration in tone when people greeted her. Venturing into town for staples, her hand resting lightly on Caleb's arm, she found the general store, usually a hive of friendly bustle, cloaked in an unnatural hush. Mrs. Peterson, typically overflowing with greetings, offered a curt nod. Even young Timmy, usually pleading for a sweet, now clung to his mother's skirts, staring. Outside, heading towards the wagon, snippets of conversation assaulted her ears. "Pity her. Doesn't feel right. Marrying a complete stranger." The words, like jagged stones, chipped away at her carefully maintained optimism. Later, as she sat on the porch swing, listening to the soughing of the cottonwoods, Martha Higgins' unmistakable voice floated up from the road. Martha was evidently holding court with Bess, the baker's wife. "Saw him myself down by the creek. Said he was pondering." "Pondering what, I wonder?" "Most likely how to get his greedy paws on the meadowsweet land. And poor Lily, bless her, is as unaware of his motives as she is of the world around her." Lily's breath caught. She understood rationally that tongues would wag, but experiencing it firsthand, the unvarnished judgment and thinly veiled condescension struck her like a physical blow. The memory of Dusty etching his proposal into the stone wavered. Was she being naive? Was she blinded not just by her sightlessness, but by the mere possibility of affection? Caleb, sensing her unease, covered her hand with his own weathered one. "Don't you mind those old biddies, Lilybug? They're just green with envy. Envious of your chance at happiness." But his words, normally a soothing balm, offered little solace this time. Doubt, a tenacious root, had burrowed into her spirit, its tendrils slowly choking her hope. She squeezed Caleb's hand, her gaze turned inward, searching for an inner fortitude she couldn't be certain she possessed. Martha's poisonous gossip had thrown a long, bleak pall over her decision. A heart's acceptance. The barn cats, sensing a change, brushed against Lily's legs as she headed toward Dusty, who was repairing the north pasture fence. The late afternoon sun vibrated in the air, thick with the aroma of cut hay and the cicadas' drowsy buzz. Martha Higgins's hurtful words still clung to Lily, a lingering sting, but the honest labor radiating from Dusty, the steady beat of his hammer, was a salve to her spirit. He paused as she approached, the hammer falling silent. His gaze, typically fixed on his work, softened as it met hers, his vision unburdened by the world's judgment. "Lily," he murmured, his voice a deep resonance that settled in the earth around them. She reached for him, her fingers interlacing with his work-worn hand. The familiar roughness steadied her, a tangible anchor against the turmoil within. "Dusty," she managed, her breath catching. She inhaled deeply, the scent of wood shavings and honest sweat a strange comfort. I accept your proposal." Surprise flickered across his features, followed by an expression close to reverence. He tightened his hold, a firm reassurance. Speechless, he simply gazed at her, a vast landscape of emotion painted in his eyes, conveying more than any vow. "I know what they're saying," she rushed on, the words pouring out. "They think I'm a fool. Blind in more ways than one." He shook his head, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. He cradled her face in his other hand, his touch featherlight. But she persisted, regaining her composure. "When I'm with you, the darkness lifts. You see me, Dusty, the person hidden from everyone else's view." She lifted her hand to meet his, her fingers pressing against his warm palm. "And I trust you. I trust my heart's compass." He bent his head, pressing a tender kiss into her open palm, a silent promise of unwavering devotion. Releasing her hand, he picked up a length of twine. With a few swift movements, he fashioned it into a simple bracelet around her wrist. Always, he breathed the word, a weighty commitment. Later that evening, after a quiet supper, Lily found Caleb on the porch swing, gazing at the fading fields. The crickets chirping filled the air, a constant undercurrent to the farm's quiet struggles. "Papa?" she asked softly. He sighed, a weary sound that spoke of years of toil. "Come sit a spell, Lilybug." She settled beside him, the swing groaning in protest. The air was cooler, carrying whispers of honeysuckle and moist earth. "Dusty tells me you gave him his answer," Caleb stated, his tone carefully measured. "Yes," Lily affirmed, her gaze drawn to the horizon where the last light had bled away. A long silence hung between them, punctuated by the swing's rhythmic cadence. Finally, Caleb spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I ain't gonna lie, Lily. I had my doubts. Still do, maybe. He's a man of few words, that Dusty. Keeps things bottled up." "But," Lily prompted gently. He released another sigh, a mixture of resignation and nascent hope. "But he treats you right, Lily, and he's been a blessing to this farm. More than that, I see it in your face. You're happy, Lilybug. Truly happy. That's all that matters." He reached over, his hand covering hers in a comforting clasp. "So you have my blessing. Go on now. Be happy." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, blurring the darkening landscape. She leaned against her father's shoulder, a wave of gratitude flooding her. "Thank you, Papa." As the moon ascended, casting elongated shadows across the fields, Lily discovered Dusty on the porch steps, shaping a piece of wood. He glanced up as she approached, his expression veiled in the twilight. She sat beside him, the silence of familiar comfort. He continued to carve, tiny curls of wood spiraling to the ground like whispered secrets. After some time, she reached out and stilled his hand, the one holding the knife. His eyes met hers. She raised his hand to her lips, pressing a kiss into his palm. "Thank you," she murmured. He squeezed her hand gently before raising it to his lips, kissing each fingertip in turn. He then rose and walked to the edge of the porch. She listened as his footsteps faded slightly into the darkness. He paused at the edge of the yard and emitted a soft whistle. A dark form separated itself from the shadows near the barn and loped toward him. It was Cole, the old farm dog. Dusty knelt, scratching the dog behind its ears, murmuring inaudible words. He gestured in her direction and Cole padded over to Lily, resting its head on her lap. Stroking the dog's soft fur, Lily smiled. Enveloped in the quiet darkness with the loyal dog beside her, she felt a tranquil peace settle over her. She was cherished, she was home, and she was prepared to face whatever lay ahead with Dusty by her side. The twine bracelet felt reassuringly present on her wrist. Wedding bells and nervous prayers. The morning arrived draped in a nervous quiet, unlike the boisterous sunrises Lily was accustomed to. It wasn't the oppressive silence of an impending storm, but a hushed expectancy that prickled her skin. Even Cole seemed subdued, his usual playful nudges replaced with gentle leans against her legs. Caleb shuffled around the small house, his movements unusually clumsy. She could practically taste his anxiety in the air, a metallic tang mingling with the familiar scent of wood smoke and lavender soap. "Are you sure about this, Lilybug?" he asked, his voice raspy. "I am, Papa," she replied, offering a reassuring smile in his direction. "More sure than I've ever been about anything." He sighed, the sound heavy with unspoken concerns. Just remember, you can always come home." Martha Higgins' words, like poisoned darts, found their mark even within the supposed sanctuary of her own home. A blind woman marrying a drifter? It's just not right. She's probably desperate. Lily pushed the venomous thoughts away, focusing on the feel of the soft cotton dress Mrs. Abernathy had helped her sew. It wasn't fancy, but it was new and it was hers. Dusty spent the morning as far away from the house as he could manage, mending fences along the north pasture. Each swing of the hammer, each staple driven home, was a prayer, a plea for strength and unwavering devotion. He checked his pocket watch countless times, the ticking a relentless reminder of the approaching moment. He smoothed down his worn, but clean, shirt, his callous fingers tracing the outline of the twine bracelet he'd crafted for Lily. He was a man of few words, but he hoped his actions would speak louder than any vows he could stumble through. Back at the house, Mrs. Abernathy carefully arranged Lily's hair, weaving in sprigs of wildflowers Caleb had gathered from the meadow, daisies, buttercups, and a single, vibrant blue cornflower. "There," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You look beautiful, dear. Simply radiant." Lily reached up, tracing the delicate arrangement with her fingertips. The flowers smelled of sunshine and freedom, a perfect reflection of the hope blooming in her heart. A tear escaped and trailed down her cheek. Now, none of that," Mrs. Abernathy chided gently, dabbing at her face with a soft cloth. "This is a day for joy." The ceremony was held in the small clearing behind the barn under the watchful gaze of the ancient oak tree. A handful of neighbors had gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled disapproval. Martha Higgins stood near the back, her arms crossed, her expression sour. Caleb walked Lily down the makeshift aisle, his hand trembling in hers. He squeezed her hand tight as he delivered her to Dusty, his eyes conveying a silent plea, "Protect her." Dusty's gaze never wavered from Lily's face. He took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. His hand was strong and steady, reassuring. He wore a borrowed suit that was a bit too tight across the shoulders, but on him it looked like noble armor. Reverend Johnson, a kind man with a booming voice, began the ceremony. His words, usually comforting, felt amplified, echoing in the tense atmosphere. Lily focused on Dusty's presence beside her, the subtle scent of hay and leather clinging to him. When it came time for vows, Dusty cleared his throat, his voice raspy but sincere. "Lily," he said, I promise to always be here. Always." He reached into his pocket and drew out the twine bracelet. He carefully fastened it around her wrist, next to the one he'd given her before. "These will always be here, like me." Lily's own voice trembled as she spoke. "Dusty, I promise to trust you, to cherish you, and to build a life with you filled with love and laughter. I promise to see the world through your eyes and to be your eyes when you need me." The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the small crowd. Caleb stepped forward, embracing Lily tightly. Then he offered Dusty a handshake, his grip firm and his eyes filled with a newfound respect. Dusty lifted Lily's hand and brought it to his lips, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't need words. His devotion was etched in every line of his face, every gentle touch. As he kissed her, the murmur of the crowd faded away, replaced by the beat of her own heart, a rhythm of hope and unwavering belief in the silent cowboy who had stolen her heart. The piano's secret. The wedding cake, a leaning tower of sugary ambition courtesy of Mrs. Abernathy, stood on the table like a silent judge. The reception air hung thick with unease. Lily could practically taste the town's reservations, a sharp undercurrent to the sweet punch. Polite murmurs swirled, a cautious buzz, each word measured and hesitant. Dusty's hand, a warm anchor at her back, offered little solace against the disquiet that had taken root deep inside. Caleb, ever dutiful, plastered on a strained grin, accepting hollow congratulations with a jerky nod. His glances toward Dusty were a muddled tableau of appreciation and lingering doubt. He wished Lily happiness, no doubt, but his notion of it likely excluded a nomadic soul with worn hands and a shadowed history. The scent of fading posies, haphazardly crammed into mismatched jars, filled the room with a cloying sweetness. A throat cleared. A chair screeched against the floorboards. The ensuing quiet was almost a physical presence. "Lily, dear," Mrs. Abernathy's voice, dripping with sugary concern, cut through the silence. "Enjoying the cake?" "It's perfect, Mrs. Abernathy," Lily managed, forcing the corners of her mouth upwards. The cake tasted of cardboard and regret. Another wave of stilted conversation washed over her, and she felt the weight of prying eyes, dissecting her choice, judging her happiness. Was she wrong? Was she tethering Dusty to a life he never asked for? The question spiraled, threatening to engulf her. "Excuse me," she breathed, gently extricating herself from the cluster of well-wishers. "I need a moment." She didn't wait for a reply, couldn't bear to. Drawn by the comforting aroma of aged timber and dust motes, she sought refuge in the corner. The old piano, a Baroque behemoth inherited from her grandmother and tragically out of tune, stood waiting. Its ivory keys, once pristine, were now yellowed and scarred, yet for Lily it remained a sanctuary. Her fingers drifted over the cool, polished wood. She ran her hand across the keys, each a familiar touchstone in her world of sound. She sank onto the worn velvet bench, which yielded to her weight. The room hushed as she settled. She felt the heat of their collective gaze, expectant and curious. She ignored it. She closed her eyes, focusing on the texture of the keys beneath her fingertips, the solid presence of the instrument. Across the room, Dusty watched. He saw the tightness in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers. He didn't need explanations to understand her unease. He'd heard the town's gossip, their veiled disapproval. He saw their sideways glances, the unspoken questions in their eyes. He knew he was an outsider, a cipher. But he also knew his own heart, and it belonged irrevocably to Lily. He took a step toward her, a silent offer of support, but paused as her fingers began to explore the keys. Tentatively at first, then with growing assurance, she played. Not a refined piece, not a rehearsed melody. It was an unbridled torrent of emotion, a discordant symphony of joy and trepidation, hope and uncertainty. The notes clashed, dissonant and raw, mirroring the chaos within her. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a fragile beauty struggled to surface. The room fell still. Even Mrs. Abernathy seemed to hold her breath, suspended in anticipation. Caleb stood rigid, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Dusty remained rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on Lily. He didn't comprehend the musicality, not in the way the others might. But he understood the feeling, the vulnerability laid bare. He saw the strength in her, the sheer courage to express her soul through the flawed instrument. He saw the woman he loved, radiant and unyielding, finding her voice in the quiet. The music crested, then ebbed, leaving a lingering resonance in the air. Lily's fingers stilled. She drew a shaky breath, the air thick in her lungs. She opened her eyes, her gaze unfocused, lost in the echoes of the sound. A single tear escaped, tracing a glistening path down her cheek. The silence stretched, heavy and profound. Then a hesitant cough shattered the spell. Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat delicately. Caleb shifted uneasily. Dusty closed the distance between them. A melody of hope. The last clashing chord lingered like a phantom echo, a jagged edge against the hushed expectancy. Then, with newfound resolve, Lily's fingers returned to the ivory. This time, certainty flowed through her, banishing any lingering doubt. She commenced to play, but not with a familiar jig or predictable two-step so common to the barn. This was an entirely different beast. A raw, unbridled melody cascaded from her touch, an intricate soundscape that enveloped the room, silencing murmurs and disarming critical gazes. It evoked windswept prairies, sunlight dappling a forest floor, the resolute strength of roots anchoring deep in the earth. It was the essence of the farm, the soul of Lily herself, exposed and vulnerable. Dusty, rooted by the doorway, leaned against the aged wood, utterly spellbound. He'd recognized Lily's inherent grace, a quiet fortitude that radiated through her sightlessness. But this was a revelation. He watched her hands dance over the keys, her brow knit in concentration, her lips slightly ajar as if savoring each note as it materialized. He perceived the power in those delicate fingers, the ardor blazing in her unseeing eyes. A profound wave of emotion, nearly knocking him off balance, crashed over him, pride, affection, reverence. He hadn't imagined such depth of feeling possible. The music surged, infusing the old barn with a palpable vivacity. The townsfolk, initially reserved and disapproving, found themselves captivated. Mrs. Henderson, previously heard questioning Dusty's intentions, tapped her foot almost imperceptibly to the rhythm. Old Man Hemlock, renowned for his perpetual gripes, sat with his mouth slightly open, his craggy face softened by the unexpected beauty. Even Lily's father, standing stiffly by the refreshment table, seemed to ease the rigid set of his shoulders. The melody evolved, growing richer and more complex. It spoke of yearning, of isolation, of the lurking fear of the unknown. Yet, woven beneath the sadness, a persistent strand of optimism remained, a fragile, unwavering conviction in the promise of something greater. It was the narrative of Lily's existence, her trials, her aspirations, all intricately intertwined into a single, breathtaking composition. A figure materialized at the entrance, pausing just beyond the threshold. Professor Silas Blackwood, his tweed coat disheveled, his spectacles askew, stood with his head tilted, listening intently. He had been immersed in grading student essays late into the night, drowning in a mire of poorly crafted verse when the sound had filtered through his casement window. Initially, he dismissed it as the wind wailing through the eaves. But then a distinct melody arose, a haunting, seductive tune that roused him from his scholarly stupor. He abandoned his papers, seized his walking stick, and followed the music, his pulse quickening with mingled curiosity and excitement. An invitation to the wedding had not arrived. He shunned social affairs, preferring the companionship of Bach and Beethoven to the prattle of village gossips. But that music proved irresistible. He nudged the door further open, his eyes widening as he absorbed the scene. The packed barn, the reverent atmosphere, the sightless girl at the piano, her fingers flying across the keys with uncanny dexterity. He recognized the antiquated Meadowsweet piano, a treasure he'd often admired from afar. He'd never witnessed it played with such spirit. The music crested, a soaring, triumphant declaration of hope and resilience. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, it subsided, leaving a profound hush in its wake. Lily's hands froze on the keys. She inhaled deeply, her chest expanding and contracting. For a moment, she remained still, lost in the afterglow of the performance. Then, slowly, she turned her face towards the sound of Dusty's breath. A subtle smile graced her lips. Professor Blackwood entered the barn, his eyes alight with fervor. He disregarded the stares of the assembled guests, oblivious to the societal awkwardness of the moment. He proceeded directly toward the piano, his gaze riveted on Lily. "Magnificent," he whispered, his voice laced with awe. "Absolutely magnificent. I haven't encountered anything of its like in decades." Harmony restored. Professor Blackwood, a wisp of a man with eyes magnified by thick spectacles, cleared his throat, the sound surprisingly loud in the aftermath of Lily's performance. "Miss Meadowsweet," he began, his voice raspy from years of disuse, "that was extraordinary. Utterly extraordinary." He adjusted his spectacles, peering at her as if she were a rare specimen under glass. "I would be deeply honored, profoundly privileged, if you would allow me to offer you instruction." Lily, still flushed and trembling slightly, turned her face towards the sound of his voice. Dusty stood protectively beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back. Caleb, his jaw slack, simply stared. "Instruction, sir?" Lily asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. "But I just play." "Indeed, you do," Blackwood affirmed, a rare smile flickering across his face. "But with guidance, with proper technique, you could move mountains. You possess a raw talent, a musicality that is simply breathtaking. I've dedicated my life to music, and I can honestly say I've never heard anything quite like it." Dusty, who understood the value of hard work and dedication, nudged Lily gently. He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, a light that had been dimmed by years of isolation and doubt. He knew this was an opportunity she couldn't afford to miss. "Lily," he said softly, his voice a low rumble. "You should." Caleb, still grappling with the evening's revelations, finally found his voice. "Professor Blackwood," he said, extending a calloused hand. "We'd be mighty grateful. Lily's always loved her music, but well, we never thought much of it." He swallowed, shame coloring his cheeks. "We were wrong." And so it began. Professor Blackwood, abandoning his dusty tomes and forgotten research, became Lily's mentor. He came to the farm every day, his ancient automobile coughing and sputtering its way down the dirt road. He taught her scales and chords, music theory and composition. He spoke of Bach and Beethoven, of Chopin and Debussy, opening up a world of possibilities that Lily had never dared to dream of. Word of Lily's talent spread like wildfire. People came from miles around to hear her play. They sat on hay bales in the barn, their faces lit by the soft glow of lanterns, listening in rapt silence as her fingers danced across the keys. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine appreciation, and still others, like Mrs. Abernathy, who had always sneered at her, came to be seen as supportive of the community. Dusty, ever vigilant, made sure everyone was respectful and comfortable. He sold refreshments, Caleb managed parking, and the barn became a gathering place, a haven of music and camaraderie. The donations they collected helped to pay for Lily's lessons and to keep the farm afloat. The atmosphere in Harmony Gulch shifted. The dour faces began to soften, the whispers of doubt faded away, replaced by murmurs of admiration. Lily's music had brought them together, had reminded them of the beauty and joy that life could offer, even in the face of hardship. Then, after years of relentless drought, the rains came. Not a gentle drizzle, but a torrential downpour, a cleansing deluge that soaked the parched earth and filled the dry riverbeds. The sunflowers, which had been withered and brown, began to sprout again, their faces turning towards the sun as if in gratitude. It was as if Lily's music had awakened the land, had broken the spell of despair that had gripped Harmony Gulch for so long. The crops flourished, the cattle grew fat, and the town prospered. Years passed. Lily and Dusty built a life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and music. Their farm became a sanctuary, a place where people could come to escape the troubles of the world and find solace in the beauty of nature and the power of art. Lily's blindness never defined her. It was simply a part of who she was, a unique perspective that allowed her to see the world in a way that others could not. Dusty was her eyes, her guide, her unwavering support. He loved her fiercely, unconditionally, and she loved him in return with a depth and passion that transcended all boundaries. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Lily sat at her piano in the barn. Dusty stood beside her, his arm around her waist, his chin resting on her head. She played a melody, a simple tune that spoke of love, hope, and gratitude. The music drifted out into the night, carried on the gentle breeze, a testament to the power of acceptance, the beauty of imperfection, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The sunflowers swayed in time with the music, their golden faces shimmering in the twilight. And in the distance, the lights of Harmony Gulch twinkled like stars, a beacon of hope in the vast darkness. Lily and Dusty, together, had created a harmony that resonated far beyond the borders of their farm, a harmony that would last a lifetime.